In this episode, we are pulling everything together so the Certified Information Systems Auditor, CISA, journey feels like one connected body of knowledge rather than a shelf full of unrelated topics. A final review only helps if it does more than repeat vocabulary, because the real challenge on this exam is seeing how ideas from different domains support one another and how the same core principles appear in different forms. For a beginner, that is often the point where the certification starts to feel more manageable, since you stop trying to memorize every detail as if it lives alone and begin noticing recurring patterns such as risk, control, accountability, evidence, and business alignment. Once those patterns become familiar, the exam becomes less intimidating because it feels more logical. This review is meant to give you that broader view, so you can hear the big picture clearly and remember that the domains are not separate worlds. They are different angles on the same question, which is whether an organization can trust the systems it depends on and prove that trust with sound governance and reliable evidence. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Across all domains, the exam is really about disciplined confidence in how information systems support the organization. Businesses rely on systems to process transactions, store information, enable communication, support customers, and drive decisions. So failure in those systems can affect money, operations, reputation, legal obligations, and long-term strategy. That is why the CISA body of knowledge keeps returning to the same practical concerns. Someone must understand where risk lives, what controls are supposed to reduce that risk, who is accountable for important decisions, and what evidence shows whether processes are actually working over time. If you remember only one big theme from this review, remember that auditing is not mainly about suspicion, and it is not mainly about technology in isolation. It is about trust that has been examined carefully. The auditor or assurance professional looks at how systems are governed, built, operated, protected, and reviewed, then asks whether management's confidence is supported by facts instead of assumption. Domain 1 centers on the information systems auditing process, and this domain matters because it teaches how assurance work is planned, executed, and communicated in a structured way. The first key idea is that audit work should be risk-based rather than random, which means attention goes first to the areas where failure would matter most or where control weakness could cause the greatest harm. Good audit planning begins with understanding the environment, the objective of the review, the systems involved, the relevant risks, and the scope that makes the work meaningful without becoming unmanageable. This domain also reinforces the importance of independence and objectivity, because audit conclusions are only useful when they are not distorted by personal bias, operational ownership, or emotional attachment to the process being reviewed. The auditor is not there to defend the department under review and is not there to attack it either. The role is to evaluate carefully, gather supportable evidence, and form conclusions that can help leadership understand where controls are strong, where weaknesses exist, and where action may be needed. Still within Domain 1, it is important to understand how evidence turns observation into a credible audit result. Evidence can come from documents, interviews, system outputs, configuration records, reports, walkthroughs, and direct observation. But the key question is not whether evidence exists in some loose form. The real question is whether it is sufficient, reliable, relevant, and appropriate for the conclusion being reached. This is also where ideas such as sampling, testing, and evaluation of control design and operation become important. A control may look good on paper and still fail in daily practice, which means the auditor must think beyond policy language and consider whether the control actually performs as intended. Communication is another major theme here, because even strong work loses value if findings are vague, exaggerated, or disconnected from business impact. A good report explains what was observed, why it matters, what risk is involved, and what management should understand about the condition of the process. Follow-up matters as well, because unresolved findings remain unresolved risk until action is actually taken. Domain 2 broadens the view by moving into governance and management of information technology, IT, which is where the organization decides how technology supports strategy, risk appetite, accountability, and overall direction. If Domain 1 teaches you how to review and assess, Domain 2 teaches you what kind of environment should exist for technology decisions to make sense in the first place. Governance is about who has authority, how priorities are set, how oversight happens, and whether leadership has a clear line of sight into the performance and risk of important systems. Management, by contrast, is more focused on execution, coordination, and day-to-day responsibility. Both matter because a well-run organization needs strategic direction and effective implementation working together. This domain includes ideas such as policies, standards, procedures, organizational structure, roles and responsibilities, performance measurement, and alignment between technology activity and business goals. A beginner should remember that technology is not supposed to drift according to habit or convenience. It should be directed intentionally, measured honestly, and connected clearly to what the enterprise is trying to accomplish. Domain 2 also includes important ideas about how organizations handle uncertainty, legal obligation, and stewardship of information. Enterprise risk management, ERM, appears here because risk is not just a technical issue hiding inside firewalls or applications. It is an organizational issue that requires leadership attention, consistent language, and clear ownership. This domain also connects to privacy, data governance, compliance obligations, and the way policies and architectural decisions influence control strength across the enterprise. A company may have talented technicians and still perform poorly if it lacks clear governance. Conflicting priorities are left unresolved, or no one can explain who owns critical risk decisions. That is why laws, regulations, industry expectations, privacy principles, and data classification all matter in this space. They shape what the organization must protect, what evidence it must retain, and how it should make decisions when convenience conflicts with responsibility. Governance is easy to underestimate because it can sound abstract, but weak governance creates confusion everywhere else, and strong governance makes almost every other control more reliable. Domain 3 moves into information systems acquisition, development, and implementation, which is where the organization decides how new systems are chosen, built, changed, and introduced into operation. This domain matters because control problems often begin long before a system goes live. If business requirements are poorly defined, risk is ignored during design, or testing is rushed because deadlines dominate judgment, the organization can inherit weaknesses that remain expensive and disruptive for years. The System Development Lifecycle, SDLC, is important here because it reminds you that system quality and control quality should be considered from the beginning rather than added later as an afterthought. This domain focuses on business cases, feasibility, requirements, project governance, change discipline, testing, approval, and implementation readiness. A strong review mindset asks whether the project is actually serving the business need, whether risks were identified early enough, whether responsibilities are clear, and whether control expectations were built into the design. When learners understand this domain well, they see that good auditing is not only about reviewing what already exists. It also involves understanding how future problems can be prevented through better project and development discipline. A deeper lesson inside Domain 3 is that successful implementation depends on much more than technical completion. A project can finish its coding work and still fail the organization if user needs were misunderstood, segregation of duties was weakened, data conversion introduced errors, documentation is incomplete, or acceptance testing did not reflect realistic operating conditions. This is why the exam expects candidates to appreciate the difference between a system that works in a narrow technical sense and a system that is ready for controlled business use. Migration into production should not feel like a leap of faith. It should be supported by testing evidence, approvals, rollback planning, change control, and clear accountability. After implementation, the system still needs review because early performance can reveal weaknesses in design, support, training, or control operation that were not visible during development. This domain teaches an important professional habit, which is to ask not only whether the project was delivered, but whether it was delivered responsibly, with control, resilience, and business readiness taken seriously from beginning to end. Domain 4 covers information systems operations and business resilience. And this is where the daily life of technology becomes the center of attention. Even a well-governed organization with carefully designed systems can still suffer serious failures if routine operations are weak, monitoring is incomplete, incidents are mishandled, or change activity is poorly coordinated. This domain reminds you that reliability is not a one-time achievement. It is maintained through disciplined operation, attention to service quality, configuration management, job processing, capacity awareness, backup practices, incident handling, and ongoing support. The exam often treats operations as a control environment of its own because everyday weaknesses can quietly create major exposure over time. A missed job, an unresolved recurring problem, or a weak access review process can produce significant consequences even when the broader strategy looks solid on paper. This domain also highlights the importance of making sure that processes are repeatable and visible, rather than depending on a few heroic individuals who keep things working through memory and personal effort. Sustainable control depends on structure, not on luck. Business resilience is an especially important part of Domain 4 because organizations are judged not only by how well systems operate in normal conditions, but also by how well they respond when normal conditions break down. That brings business continuity, disaster recovery, backup validation, recovery priorities, testing, and crisis coordination into the picture. These concepts matter because recovery plans that have never been tested can produce dangerous confidence, while tested plans provide evidence that the organization can restore critical services within acceptable limits. This domain also touches third-party relationships, maintenance practices, logging, monitoring, and service expectations, since modern organizations often depend heavily on vendors and shared service providers. The auditor must therefore think beyond the walls of the internal data center and ask whether operational dependence on outside parties is understood and controlled. A key lesson here is that resilience is not created during the emergency itself. It is created by the planning, documentation, communication paths, and recovery discipline that existed long before the disruption began. Organizations that recover will usually prepared well, and that truth shows up repeatedly in this domain. Domain 5 focuses on protection of information assets, and this is the domain many beginners first associate with cybersecurity because it deals directly with safeguarding data and systems from unauthorized access, misuse, damage, or disruption. At the center of this domain are the enduring goals of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which together describe what organizations need from their information in order to trust it and use it safely. If information is exposed to the wrong people, altered without authorization, or made unavailable when needed, the business can suffer serious harm. This domain, therefore, includes access control, security architecture, network protections, data classification, cryptographic safeguards, physical protection, security monitoring, and user awareness. It is important, however, not to reduce the domain to tools alone. The deeper issue is whether assets are protected in a way that reflects business value, risk level, and accountability. Protection should be purposeful, layered, and aligned with how the organization actually uses its systems, not just assembled from isolated technical features that do not fit together well. A broader understanding of Domain 5 also includes vulnerability management, identity control, incident response, and the full life cycle of sensitive information. Users should receive the access they need, not excessive access that remains long after their role changes. Sensitive data should be classified thoughtfully, retained appropriately, monitored carefully, and disposed of in a way that prevents later exposure. Security incidents should not be treated as random surprises that produce confusion every time they occur. They should be met with defined responsibilities, prepared workflows, and enough monitoring to detect important activity before it grows into deeper damage. This domain also connects naturally to privacy and governance because protection decisions are stronger when the organization knows what data it holds, why it matters, who owns it, and what obligations apply to it. Beginners sometimes think this domain is the only one that truly concerns security, but that is too narrow. In reality, protection is strengthened or weakened by decisions made in every other domain, from governance and development to operations and audit oversight. When you step back and compare all 5 domains, The strongest insight is that they reinforce one another constantly. Weak governance makes projects drift, poor development creates operational problems, weak operations increase security exposure, and weak auditing leaves leadership without a reliable understanding of what is really happening. In the same way, strong governance supports better development, disciplined operations support stronger security, and effective auditing helps leadership make informed decisions about control and risk. This is why the exam often rewards the answer that reflects business context, clear responsibility, and sound process rather than the answer that sounds the most technical. Across domains, you keep seeing the same themes return in different forms. Know the objective, understand the risk, identify the control, gather the evidence, and connect everything back to business impact. That is the rhythm of the certification. When learners hear that rhythm clearly, the domains stop feeling like separate chapters to survive and start feeling like parts of one professional worldview about how organizations build and maintain trust in their systems. As a final review, the most useful thing you can carry forward is not a giant pile of disconnected facts, but a clear mental model of how the domains work together. Domain 1 teaches how to assess and communicate with discipline. Domain 2 teaches how leadership, structure, and accountability shape the environment in which technology decisions are made. Domain 3 teaches that systems must be acquired and developed with control in mind from the start. Domain 4 teaches that reliable operation and resilience require steady management long after implementation. Domain 5 teaches that information assets must be protected in ways that preserve trust and reduce harm. Together, these ideas define the heart of the CISA perspective. They tell you that organizations deserve confidence only when governance is clear, controls are appropriate, operations are reliable, protection is meaningful, and evidence supports what management believes to be true. If you keep that whole picture in mind, the details become easier to place, the exam becomes easier to reason through, and the certification begins to feel less like a maze and more like a coherent professional language.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.